welcome back to Kiki's Closet. Today we are celebrating all things gay! No, really. All 5 of today's guests have been using their platforms to help elevate and amplify queer voices. So let's get this party started because you know what they say. Today is a great day to be gay.
Who said that? Who said that?
Come on and come and play in Kiki's Closet today.
All 5 of today's guests are gay icons in my life. Please help me welcome my friends.
Brandon Contreras, Matt Curiano, Nick Eibler, Drew Lausch, and Zach Teague.
Hey boys, welcome to Kiki's Closet. Thank you so much for being here. I'm obsessed with each and every one of you. This might be the gayest Zoom call of my entire life, and I cannot wait to talk more. First question I want to ask all of you, what color is your heart today? And I expect some fun answers because you're all very fun people.
My go-to is rainbow, but that's just because I can't think of anything else. I feel like there's more shades of purple and lavender because I've recently become obsessed with the color lavender.
I'm feeling like an ice blue, you know what I mean? Like I'm feeling very frozen, very frosty, the snowman right now during this crazy snowstorm.
I think my color of my heart today is like this deep, dark purple. It's very like grounded, but also like very cute. It's just like that.
Honestly, like, not to sound basic, but kind of like pink. Like I just there's like a sweater too, and it's just kind of like, that's what I'm exuding today.
We got the hair, we got the sweater. All things
right.
You're basically Elle Woods.
That's the nicest thing anybody's ever said, yeah.
I'm gonna go with like dirty white Air Force Ones. Well, because that's all I could think of because my Air Force Ones are dirty and I have to go buy new ones today.
That's also the queer agenda. That is the queer agenda. It's like your shoes are dirty, so you're like, I'm not gonna clean them. I'm just gonna go buy new.
It's like I woke up in a cold sweat this morning, being like, oh, they're filthy. I need to go buy new ones. So that's like the first thing that came to my mind. That's my answer. Thank you.
I want to ask you boys, do you remember the first time that you saw the queer community represented in media?
Okay, I might be making myself old, but I don't know if you all remember this show called Undressed on MTV. It was late night, and it was like essentially softcore porn that started around like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And like I was maybe like 8 or 9, and I was obsessed with Undressed. So I used to go down into my basement to go watch it. But yeah, that's where I saw there was this hot tub scene between these two guys, and I was like, what is going on and why am I feeling all of these things? I must really love hot tubs. That's what I thought.
I feel like YouTube clips, I always used, like when I was starting to realize that maybe I was a Momo, I liked watching clips of the show Queer as Folk, like on YouTube, and like I would like imagine that I was in like a love story like that. I wasn't, but I feel like that was sort of that was my first experience.
I feel like mine's a little more of a depressing turn. My first memory of queer identity, gay identity, was the movie Prayers for Bobby. It was a Lifetime original movie with Sigourney Weaver. She was this like devout Christian mother based off of a true story. And I don't know how I came across it, but for some reason, when I was younger, I had a TV in my room and I only had a select few channels. 2 of those channels were Lifetime TV and Logo TV. So I grew up pretty fast. Spoiler, he ends up jumping off a bridge at the end of the movie. But that was my first introduction to gay identity, what gay people, what queer people are. But then I started watching more Logo TV and I saw Drag Race and Queer as Folk and Noah's Ark. Like I was terrified of drag queens, but I was like, but I can't stop watching.
But then Nick and I met when we were drag queens ourselves in the Kaja Fall at Red House Art Center in Syracuse a couple years ago.
Now I love them.
Definitely that journey of Queer as Folk and Noah's Ark, for sure. That was like something that I was like, I need to watch this and I need everyone to not be here and to leave me alone. But I think that like my first like real take of like the queer identity was I would go through the underwear aisle of Walmart and I would look at like the underwear models, like, you know, like, and I remember my mom being like, why are you always here? I was like, I think I always just want underwear. Like she would find me and I'd just be like in the aisle, like looking at the bodies and the bulges and I'd be like,
What if I said Mrs. Doubtfire? That'd be so bad. No,
The makeover scene in Mrs. Doubtfire is absolutely iconic. Probably my favorite scene of that entire movie.
I think like something clicked in me when I was watching Bring It On. It's something about like the boys and like them hinting at like them being gay and like men being cheerleaders and then me wanting to sign up for gymnastics. I don't know, like that was like kind of the start of it all. Oh, do you also remember Sassy Gay Friend on YouTube?
Oh my God!
Like, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Are there any stalkers on my grounds? Do you remember, like, if Juliet had, like, a gay best friend?
What are you doing?
What? Step away from the water. Yeah.
I loved Ophelia.
That was iconic, too.
All 5 of you have such wonderful queer content out in the world and in New York. We've got Matt and Brandon from the Homo Sapien Experience, which I was very lucky to do the very first episode of.
Yes!
And Nick has a wonderful podcast, Queer Curries. And Drew and Zach have this beautiful concert, what do we call it? Variety show, gay extravaganza called House Party that I've been lucky to go to as well. And I'm wondering if you ever had any hesitation putting forth gay stories and gay voices.
I don't know that I had any hesitations about putting queer content out there. Maybe like my younger self, definitely. But now I was like, no hesitation. I think my biggest thing is I've revealed a lot of very personal stories in terms of my coming out journey, and then also a lot of my sex life. Not super explicit, but some stories have been shared, and I never would have expected that to happen. I'm not doing it just to do it. It's just how the conversation goes, and I do it with hopes to normalize these conversations and normalize like queer sex and just queer lifestyle.
I don't think we're necessarily worried, but I think like our community, which I think is one of the best parts of our community, is that we're always changing. We're always moving. We're always finding something new about ourselves. I think when we approach material, we really have to see the world around us and how it's changing. And if we're changing with it, not in just our content first, it's actually us as humans first and what we're learning and what we're soaking in, and then how we showcase that in our content, and then how are we respectful, how are we also inclusive of everyone across the board.
The whole point is to start the conversation, you know what I mean? Some of these things, these issues that we're talking about, maybe like you don't see those storylines maybe as much. Also, I think the thing that like should be said too is we have run into problems with being like censored. It's interesting how queer content as opposed to like heterosexual content is much more easily flagged and taken down, and that is something that needs to change. And also I think that's literally like a representation of what society is, right? Why is queer content more risque? Simply because. To gender nonconforming, to same-sex people kissing, for some reason, is an upped ante than a man and a woman kissing. Why? That's also why we're making this content. It's like, it's time, let's normalize this, let's go. It's 2021, let's push the human race forward. And I think that's the beauty of the queer community, is I feel like we are always on like the cusp of what is to come. We're always eager, looking forward. That's what makes it so beautiful to be here.
Yeah, Matt, I think you bring up such a beautiful point, because Drew and I have kind of experienced that censorship recently. Being in stand-up comedy, it's very much a straight space. I mean, like a lot of spaces are. So we weren't hesitant about starting a queer show because this was a space we were creating for ourselves and for our queer friends. So that was finally like a relief and an outlet for us. We did a corporate gig a few days ago at like a finance firm online, and they wanted like us to do this LGBTQ positive show. And like, as we were putting it together, they were like, well, this is kind of offensive. And Drew and I kind of had to like draw a line in the sand a little bit, like, okay, is it offensive because it's offensive, or is it offensive because it makes straight people feel uncomfortable? Mm-hmm. Like, you can't really censor queer comics because the content we're talking about comes from years of us facing aggression, and our outlet is just things we've experienced, and if that makes you uncomfortable, that's not offensive.
Yeah, and I think like, I don't know, just in terms of like doing like a show that's queer centered, I mean, that was obviously like a little bit of a salty experience, because we were like, the word queer is not a bad word, and the fact that you're like equating that is like bonkers to us. But I think doing a show that is queer centered and is like, oh, we're gonna have like all queer performers and it's gonna be whatever, it's like also about showing that like this content is accessible to all genders and all sexualities and all people, for whoever wants to see that it isn't just like, oh, like we're just doing this queer show. Like, it's like, no, this is a show for everybody. And like, even if you think you have nothing in common with these queer individuals, you'll surprise yourself and you'll learn something new.
I think we're all seeing how important representation is. And I want to talk about a movie that just came out, The Prom. Nick made his Broadway debut in the show. What was it like to be a part of a show that was telling a queer love story that we hadn't really seen before?
Absolutely incredible. One of the best experiences for a multitude of reasons. Just to tie something back to what we're talking about in terms of seeing queerness represented in more familial spaces. Like when you had Caitlin and Izzy, who were the two leads in The Prom, share the first same-sex kiss on the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And you had all of these people all up in arms because of this like few-second kiss and like not in front of our children. For it to be a show that did something like that, and those of us who live in places like New York City or LA can sometimes get caught up in like, oh, those stories aren't happening as much anymore. Those like stories of a community really rallying against a queer individual. We always need to be thinking about, when we create content, that little queer child that's in the middle of wherever, Oklahoma or Indiana, that doesn't get to express themselves like we do. I'm just so grateful that that show in particular was my Broadway debut.
I would love to actually talk about like queer representation specifically for Black, Indigenous people of color. It was very clear to me growing up and finding my identity. And then also at that time, I wasn't living in a city like New York, and finding myself surrounded by mostly white bodies and queer people who were mostly white, which was so hard to not only find myself, but to see myself in others. If I'm watching Queer as Folk, that was a white show based on a white narrative, always. It wasn't until something like Noah's Ark came that really shifted everything. And where I am not a Black person, it still was a part of me and a part of my experience growing up as queer. We always have to be actively unlearning. And that was just so hard to try to learn and unlearn what was right, what was wrong, what was attractive, what was to me, what was the epitome of beauty to me. I didn't consider myself beautiful until college. Queer representation also, as much as we are a marginalized community, there are so many intersections within that we need to take care of.
I mean, you see caricatures of mostly white gay men, right? Being extremely flamboyant, and that's like the only facet that they have and the only characteristic, or kind of like romanticizing the tragedies of being a queer person, like being beat, like trans people being beat in movies. And I think like a lot of that is up to us to make sure that like when we're creating stuff, being queer isn't the driving force of the storyline.
A big part of like the mission for people of color to feel is that like we're always portrayed as like these hard individuals. It's hard, or it's either flamboyant, gakkety gakka, I'm going to teach you a lesson at the end of this movie or play, and then, or, I'm hard, I'm in the closet, I'm straight, you know what I mean? Like, or like I'm straight passing. Like it's this white, it's this like narrative.
Well, and that's the hard thing about like creating queer content too, is like people, like in order for it to be digestible for people, there has to be a takeaway. There has to be something you're learning from a gay person or a trans person. It's like it doesn't have to be that way. It shouldn't be up to us.
The queerness is always a problem to be solved in a straight cis world, as opposed to it just existing and not being othered in some kind of way. I was doing a show recently where I was playing like a rough kind of character, and I had a moment where we were in rehearsal just kind of by myself, and I was just kind of like playing around and exploring the character in my body, and I found myself doing like a few like limp wrists and acting like how me, Nick, feels perfectly comfortable acting. And this voice in my head was like, no, you can't do that. That wouldn't exist in this world. No note from anyone. No one told me anything. But it was like one of those moments where I was like, but wait, when was it ever said that in this world, my character is assumed to be heterosexual? And again, this assumed heteronormativity just ingrained in how we teach, and it not being queer or gay unless it's explicitly stated. Even if you're like ensemble member number 5 in the background, it's like you're automatically heterosexual.
It's honestly something that I'm hyper aware of whenever I'm on stage, whether I'm in the ensemble or playing a principal. Usually I'm just a little more feminine in the way I hold myself, but it's something that I'm very aware of to have to tone down sometimes. And sometimes you're like on stage and you're thinking about it, and then you're like, oh shit, I just took myself out of the story to make sure that the straight audience doesn't think I'm gay. It's a whole vicious cycle. I have one final question for today. What changes would you like to see in how the LGBTQ community is represented in the entertainment world?
I think a lot of beautiful stories have been told that can't be taken away from us. Unfortunately, mostly straight people were in those roles, but they were still very informative. But I mean, in terms of representation, would obviously love to see it on the screen, but would love to see it behind the camera too. I think that's where the work needs to be done, because it's a trickle-down situation. If you have queer people, people of color, creating these stories, then that's what you're going to see on screen. Like, all of us here want to create production companies, and that's something, I mean, we've all been through something where like people told us we had to be straight, and it's scary. It's like when you're around a bunch of straight people and they're playing soccer and then the ball comes to you and you're like, oh my God, do I have to kick this back to them? And it's so scary. And you're like, well, no, now we're, you know, do you know what I'm talking about? And it's the worst thing ever. And so like now, yeah, we're in these situations where we're like, okay, the content that we were being told to put out, these straight scripts and stuff, like now we're creating our own stuff because that's what needs to be done.
I just think that we need the space. I'm just tired of carving out elbow room. Like, I'm just tired of like doing this and being like, I think I'm here. Specifically for me, I think it's queer representation in people of color and across that spectrum, and what it's like for us to not be tokenized, fetishized, to know the different nuances and the layers and the different kinds of queer people. And I mean this across the board, regardless of race. But I think for me, I would love to see people who look like me or us, TJ, and I know that we specifically bond over this as well, which is like one of my favorite parts of our friendship, is that like to see what it's like to be soft and delicate and sensitive, and to really show nuance in us as humans, and to really like find a way to work together, because unfortunately the way that the world works, there's always going to be someone with more money, and that person with money is going to be white usually, and it's hard. So I'd rather just get up there, abolish it all, and then just start the world from scratch.
The first thing that comes to my mind is, for me, I am not afraid of oversaturating the market with queer content. You look at all of the Hallmark movies that were coming out this year, and it was literally white man, white woman, Christmas at the Cape, Christmas at this, Christmas at that, Christmas at that. And I'm just wanting to be there as support and initiate and help queer voices flourish and create. And I feel like I won't be happy until there's like a Netflix that is all queer content, and you have just a variety of stories, not stories that are just sensationalizing our experience or trauma porn, but ones that are literally just everyday life, just being who we are.
I loved, Brandon, what you said about like elbowing in places. Like, I think it's a testament to like everybody's work here, especially like, it's so cool how like queer individuals have like created so many spaces and like atmosphere and like opportunities for other queer people. And I think that's like probably like the key to it all. I just think like definitely no more like straight white men like directing films about like a queer coming of age experience. Like, that's like probably like, let's just cancel that. And also I think, sort of going off, Nick, what you said, like more stories about like not like the casual queer experience, but like Zach and I were chatting about like Euphoria the other day. I love how that show doesn't address anybody's gender or sexuality, or like, it's just like, you just take it at face value and you accept it. But like, no one's been like, oh God, like what is this character? Jules is like XYZ. It's like, no, you realize like, this is, you know, their experience, and like, and you move forward. And an all gay Netflix, come on. Yeah, also a great idea. I'm in. Girls, let's start it. We're doing it.
Give me more queer life. I want to see it all. And can we challenge ourselves that I think part of the reason that we run into issues is because most of mainstream queer media is white cis gay men. So like a queer show could just have everybody represented in the queer community, because it almost seems like the process has to be cis gay white men, cis gay men of color, then maybe a lesbian side character who is over, you know what I mean? And then as we go down, the trans community kind of gets left in the wayside, right? So it's like, can we just take everyone's arm and pull everyone up together, just right here, right there? That's the dream. And
that's why I admire all of you so much, because you're all really doing the work and making sure that everyone has a voice. And thank you so much for being here today. I had such a fun time talking with you all together. This is a wonderful conversation, and I love you all. I hope to see you all soon. Bye.
Bye.
Come on and come and play in Kiki's closet.